This controller has mechanical switch face buttons and magnetic interchangeable faceplates, and it's called the EasySMX X10 Mechanic Master. This controller works with PC, Android, iOS, and Nintendo Switch by way of 2.4 GHz dongle, Bluetooth, or a wired connection. It also supports both X input mode and direct input mode. The X10 can be had for around 30 Great British pounds depending on when and where you buy it. And I want to say a big thanks to EasySMX for letting me test their controller out. Note that they didn't see this video before it went live, and nor did they have any influence over it. You can check the description for a link to the EasySMX website where you can check out this controller and its accessories yourself. The X10 carries a fairly standard Xboxy look with a smart colorway out of the box. On the front you're going to see a standard dual analog stick setup. These are Hall sensor analog sticks with anti-friction rings. All of the other inputs, such as the clicky D-pad, the mechanical face buttons, and the various function buttons, are this somewhat odd greenish grey colour. At the top you'll see the home button, which is adorned with the EasySMX horsey, which is not to be confused with the GameSir chicken. In the middle at the bottom there's a single LED indicator, and just above that is a settings key which will let you access various features of this controller. The grips themselves are textured with a diamond pattern. On top you'll see your standard shoulders and triggers, which have an etched, grippy texture, a USB-C port for charging and wired connection, along with a mount for attaching a phone holder. Although note that this phone holder doesn't support the FlyDigi or GameSir style as far as I can tell. On the bottom of the controller you'll see these stealthy buttons for turbo and vibration, but on the back there are the macro keys, a slide switch for the different connection modes, and more of that diamond pattern. The X10 feels pretty nice in the hands, although it is definitely on the heavier side at around 250 grams. The texture on the front and the back of the grips feels good, but it's not overly grippy or anything, it's just kind of hard plastic that feels rough. I guess it does improve the grip somewhat. One of the primary appeals of this controller is of course the magnetic faceplates, and there are actually 3 that you can remove and change out here. One on the front of each grip, and one big one for the center faceplate too. Each one has a little slot to help you with the removal, but I have to say that it's a real struggle to remove the primary faceplate from the bottom here. So I recommend going in from the right hand side instead, and it should just pull straight off. So here's the controller in the nude. But thankfully we're able to protect its dignity, because EasySMX has included an alternate set of faceplates in the box. Here's the controller in all white, but you can of course mix and match if you want to. A purple set is available on the website, along with this anime girl design which I wouldn't be caught dead with. I quite like the white faceplate with the black grips myself. However, I do wish I had the opportunity to change out the face buttons and the D-pad though, or that they were just a bit more neutral in colour, because that greenish grey colour just doesn't look particularly great with the white faceplate. If the buttons were black or a proper grey, I think they would look a lot better. Anyway, without further ado, let's take a look at the controls. You'll be happy to hear that even at this budget price, these are Hall effect analog sticks, with anti-friction rings and a firm rubber cap. They're fairly smooth, but there's definitely a bit of friction between around 10 and 2 o'clock on both sticks. Still, they respond fine in game and I have no real complaints about them. Of course, this controller's namesake is the mechanical face buttons. I like the big size of these, and their height, and the very sturdy feeling that they have. The mechanical switches here have a surprising amount of travel and they're very satisfying, with a loud and firm click. They get their special feeling from a combination of a rubber membrane and a standard mouse click switch underneath. I like these a lot, but they are very firm and chunky. Make of that what you will. Also, like I've already said multiple times, I'm not a huge fan of this greenish grey colour. And I'm also not a huge fan of the font they used, or the fact that the labels are just kind of slapped on there in light grey. It just looks a little bit cheap and not very nice. Overall though, for a cheap controller with mechanical switches, these are completely fine. As is so often the case, the D-pad is unfortunately the weakest part of the X10. It's very tall, which I like, and it has a very pleasant bowl shape. And it has tactile dome switches underneath. The problem is though the stiffness of the switches. When you tap directions quickly, it gets very, very tiring. I've been playing games like Puyo Puyo Tetris, Pocket Card Jockey, and Pokemon Puzzle League lately, and all of these games require very fast tapping of the D-pad. And it's pretty much a nightmare on this controller. This D-pad is just too stiff for that kind of game. And not only will it tire out my thumb, but it makes me a little bit slower in hitting those directions as well. It also feels like there's a little too much squish under the switch here when you push down on it firmly. This makes rolling the D-pad around intensely just kind of a muddy and unpleasant experience, and not that sharp, clicky, tactile one that you might expect from a dome switch D-pad. Another big problem with the D-pad is the upward false input. I always test D-pads in DuckTales, Because if your controller has a false diagonal in the down direction when you slide from left to right, Scrooge will crouch in the middle of the turn. And it's a pretty good indicator of how accurate your D-pad is. And I didn't have any problems in this game in particular, but I still felt like something was just off about this D-pad. And then I realized that while there's no false directional input on the down direction, there's a huge false input on the up direction. And if you take a look at the Gamepad Tester app here, you can see that it's almost impossible to move between the left and right directions without hitting up along the way. This issue manifests itself in Tekken, where Yoshimitsu will backflip with an input of forward, up, and back. In this case, it's right, up, left. And on this D-pad, just sliding the D-pad quickly from left to right will almost always trigger the backflip move, rather than just jittering back and forward like you should. Another move for Yoshimitsu is back, down, forward, square, which will trigger Moonsault Slayer. In contrary to the up direction, because the down direction is so hard to hit, this move is actually pretty difficult to pull off. And it certainly doesn't trigger with a simple back-forward movement like it does with the backflip. So this isn't the worst D-pad I've ever used, but it's definitely not my favorite ever. And there's definitely some very tangible problems with it. Another one off the top of my head is when you're playing Puyo Puyo Tetris. Pressing the up direction will automatically move your block to the bottom, and that's something that happens all too often when I'm using this D-pad. Moving on, the other inputs on the front of this controller are all very loud and clicky dome switches, but I have no real issue with them. Thankfully, the horsey button is a little easier to press and a little bit softer. Moving on to the bumpers, these are tactile switches as well, but they have a surprising amount of travel. They're very light and easy to press and have a good shape, along with that nice grippy texture. No complaints about these whatsoever. Really, I never really know what to say about bumpers, they're usually totally fine. The triggers themselves are very nice, with that same grippy texture. They have a good amount of travel, and the travel itself is very smooth. In addition, these triggers have one of my favorite features, which is a soft bottom out, which means that when you push down on them hard and quickly, there's not that plastic on plastic clash. It's a very softened impact, and it feels really nice. These triggers work great for games like Rush Rally 3, where you require precise analog inputs, and I have really no complaints about them. So the X10 overall in terms of controls is a fine controller. The D-pad isn't the best in the world, but in many games you're not going to notice any problems other than it's just a bit uncomfortable, and a little too hard to press. But in some other games you're really going to feel the problem of that upwards input. The mechanical switch face buttons feel fine to press, but that's honestly about it. The thing with the X10 is that there's nothing really particularly special about it. Everything feels a little bit by the numbers, and nothing jumps out as particularly unique or impressive. For retro gaming, you'll be held back mostly by the stiff and tiring D-pad with its false up direction. But the face buttons do feel very nice and responsive, and are well suited for fast inputs. The triggers and the sticks here work very well for modern gaming, but that's about it. Again, there's just nothing really particularly special here. But I don't really mean that in a bad way either. It just is what it is. However, the controller does come equipped with some nice standard features. For example, a gyroscope which can be used only on the Nintendo Switch. It works perfectly well in games like Mario Kart, but I do wish that I could set it up universally to work on systems outside of the Switch. Unfortunately, it's just not possible. The controller also has a turbo mode which can be activated with the turbo button. And it's a really nice turbo mode where you can adjust the frequency between various levels and set it to semi-auto or full auto mode. You can also record macros for use with the macro keys on the back of the controller. All you have to do is hold the settings button for 3 seconds until the light blinks, press the macro button you want to use, and then program your macro. The macro feature supports up to 17 inputs, and that includes analog sticks and triggers and stuff like that, and it will save the timing of your macro as well. The macro buttons themselves are soft and tactile and positioned well, and to reset your macros you just hold the settings button for 5 seconds until the controller vibrates. Speaking of vibration, there's actually an exclusive vibration button on the bottom of the controller, which offers 5 levels of vibration from off to full vibration. The vibration here feels fine, but it's not HD rumble or anything like that. So with all that in mind, what are my overall likes and dislikes of the X10 Mechanic Master? Let's start with my likes. First of all is the interchangeable grips and faceplates. And the fact that you can get an extra in the box is just a fun feature, and I think that if you really like to customize your controller and change things up a lot, this controller is one of the better magnetic faceplate setups I've seen. But also there are actually magnetic faceplates available to buy, which is not always the case with this feature. Despite being a budget controller, the X10 does have Hall effect analog sticks and triggers. Now if you know anything about me, you know this is not a deal breaker for me, but I know for many people it is, so rest assured it has them here. I like this controller has multiple connection methods, including a wired mode, and X input or D input mode. The feeling of the mechanical face buttons is very good and I like it a lot. And I like that this controller has a good wealth of turbo options. It's a fully featured turbo setting, which isn't always the case. I also like the on-device macros, they're easy to use, easy to program, and easy to clear. And also this is kind of a strange one, but I like that there's no software for this controller. Now that's kind of strange for me to say because I love it when my controllers have software and I can tweak every tiny little aspect of them. And that's really not the case with the X10, there's no software at all actually. But sometimes that's a good thing because then a controller is just a controller and you don't need to mess with anything, and it's just kind of a keep it simple stupid situation. And finally, I think that this controller is very decently priced for what it is. And now for my dislikes, the first being the poor D-pad. It's really not great, it causes a lot of discomfort in certain games due to its stiffness, and you have that false upward direction. Next, I really don't like the green-grey color of the face buttons. They don't look very nice at all unless you have that grey faceplate installed, and I think that they should just be a more neutral grey. Next is the fact that there's no universal gyroscope on this controller. It's a feature I always look for now and I kind of expect. Also, this controller is kind of heavy for what it is. In fact, it's heavier than my fully featured Vader 3 Pro, though I'm guessing a lot of this weight comes from the magnet setup. And finally, my last dislike is that even though the price is good for what this controller is, it certainly doesn't feel like the best controller out there for the price. So that's the X10. For a budget controller available for around 30 Great British pounds, it's really not bad. But it's just not overwhelmingly good either. It's just kind of okay, and I sense that here you're mostly paying for the option of customizable faceplates. But outside of that, it's just a pretty okay controller, I guess. And, well, that's all I have to say about it. If you want to see a couple of other budget controllers in this price range, please go ahead and check out my review of the FlyDigi Direwolf 2 or the T4 Cyclone from Gamester, which are both on screen now. If you like this video, please go ahead and leave a like on it, and comment down below what you think of the X10 in the comment box below. And finally, I'll say a big thanks to my friend Peter Hulls for recommending this controller to me. And that's this one done. Thank you very much for watching Retro Breeze, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.